Over the course of June, I completed 7 games and enjoyed pretty much all of them. There was some anime, some VR, and even some mental health awareness. Hope you had a great Pride Month, and now, let's take a look at some games. This is one I feel like I started an age ago before this channel was even a concept, and just recently came around to finishing it. If you somehow missed what this game is all about, it's a fast-paced, first-person platformer where you run through different areas of heaven as a soul plucked out of hell and forced to kill demons. And all of this is in a very, let's say, anime-inspired style. Gameplay first, and the one word I would have to use is tight. Everything here flows extremely well. The basic movement is fast and floaty enough that you can plan your route whilst falling. As levels progress, you'll pick up different cards that not only allow you to shoot at the various demonic enemies, but also discard them to use various abilities. This helps keep things interesting, as the puzzle of working out if you needed to hold onto them for later use or immediately discard them was 99% great fun, with the occasional bit of frustration, though that was mainly down to the collectibles and platinum medals. Yes, you heard me right, it's another game with a medal system. Though even I, a self-proclaimed shitter, managed to get all platinum, so it's very achievable and not overly frustrating to accomplish. When you're not running around slaying demons, you're back in heaven interacting with the various NPCs, and the dialogue here is a bit of an acquired taste that I just so happen to adore. If you struggle with cringe, you probably won't like this, but for me, it moves just faster than the speed of cringe to stay funny and ironic, so I very much enjoyed it. The characters slowly open up to you, and the overarching plot about how you're all connected is decent enough, though not anything groundbreaking or totally unpredictable. It helps link the gameplay together and keep you progressing, but aside from that, it's not going to have you on the edge of your seat trying to work out what's happening. Plus, wood, and wood times 2.
Give me both!
Overall, I very much enjoyed this one, and while I won't be grinding to the top of the leaderboards, the skill ceiling is super high for anyone that cares, but the floor is low enough that it's fairly approachable to anyone. I'm going to give it a solid 8 out of 10. Stray is another one I started during my month of insanity, and I actually started it again to play through with my partner, with us taking turns. Now, she's not really that into games, but this was a great pick as the gameplay is fairly casual exploration based with the occasional bit of high speed chasing, making it a great introduction to games, plus it stars a cute kitty. Who wouldn't love that? The gameplay, as I said, is mainly exploration based. You're a kitty that's fallen into this abandoned city, closed off from the outside world, and left to rot alongside its robot inhabitants. You're searching for a way out and come across B12, a little robot helper who also wants to find a way out and open the city back up so that everyone can be free. Everything here controls very simply, if occasionally fiddly. Jumping is just pointing where you want to go and hitting A. But sometimes you'll be slightly too close or slightly too far and have to get in just the right spot to get the option to jump. It's nothing that ruins the game, but it does take some getting used to, especially for someone not used to playing a lot of games. The fast-paced chases are mostly just holding run and jumping away from enemies of various shapes and sizes. Once you know where you're going, it's fairly straightforward, but when you're still working that out, it can be pretty tense. The story here is extremely simple, but the lore of this world is a lot more interesting. I mean, you're playing as a cat that wants to go outside. The story of doing that can only be so complex. That said, you come across various characters over the course of the game that help you out, and the majority of them were very likeable, helped in no small part by their interesting and very cute designs. As I said, the lore of this city and the robots abandoned by humanity and slowly left to fall apart or be consumed by garbage-eating bacteria is really interesting and will absolutely be in a video at some point. But the start of this game has to be the visuals. It's a stunningly beautiful game, from the detail of the cat's animations to the unique robot characters and the cyberpunk design of the more bustling areas of the city. The lighting is especially fantastic, and even playing this streamed from my PC to my Steam Deck to my TV, it looked amazing. It only happened once, but it is worth mentioning that we got soft-locked ones where a character just refused to move, so we did have to restart the chapter. It took only maybe 10 minutes to get back to where we were, but still, it did happen, so I will mention it. Overall though, this is an excellent execution of a great idea. Cute animal goes on an adventure with a cute robot. Quite short, but very sweet. Another 8 out of 10. If you haven't heard of it, which wouldn't surprise me because I hadn't, World of Horror is a 1-bit style horror roguelite where you solve various mysteries around a town to eventually ward off a Lovecraftian apocalypse from a dark god. Oh, and most of the art and storytelling is a direct love letter to Lovecraft and Junji Ito, aka the horror manga messiah, whose work I've been devouring since I got into manga towards the end of last year. Even if you don't know him, chances are you know of his work, if only by this image and the accompanying short story that is as terrifying as it looks. Only a little bit of contrast from Stray, but aside from that, it was a pretty seamless transition. The gameplay here is very confusing. There is somewhat of a tutorial, but it's one of those that tells you how to play the game without helping you understand why you're doing the things you do. Like, you complete a mystery by clicking these buttons, but other than that, it leaves things very vague. For example, you have D&D stats, but all the game tells you is, these are used for skill checks or combat. Like, gee, thanks buddy, I wish I knew what that meant. Now I could get through a game pretty quick, but even when I completed my first full run and technically completed the game, I don't really know what I did right compared to the other times. Now, confusion aside, you're going around solving different mystery horror stories, and to me, this is where the game shines. Each one is a short, self-contained horror story that you uncover as you go. And I don't want to spoil any of these since, to me, it is the best part of the game by far. I was the most engaged when I was finding out more about what was going on. You progress each story by investigating different areas and solving various dilemmas. They're mostly skill checks that are fairly poorly explained and seem more tied to the area than the case, but they still keep up these spooky vibes for the duration. There's also combat, which is a little bit hit and miss. No, literally. You basically just queue up your actions of attack and defense, but I found just spamming attacks got me through most fights. Occasionally, you'll come up against a ghost, which requires you to complete a ritual, which is a specific combination of clap and bow actions, which can be kind of frustrating to work out, but on the whole, it was passable. If you build the right stats, you can make this a lot easier, so when in doubt, raise everything at the same time, focusing on strength and dex first to make any combat a lot easier. There's also a leveling system, but it's just increasing your different stats that, as I said, are poorly explained, so I couldn't really tell you a strong build if I tried. Each mystery also has a number of different endings, encouraging you to find them all, but if I'm honest, most of the time I have no idea how I got to the endings I did anyway, so trying something different is a bit of a challenge, but still, more story, so I'm not complaining. The visual style of this is another very strong point. While it may not be for everyone, I love the 1-bit art style, and it works excellently with the Junji Ito and Lovecraftian horror. The style may have a lot of limitations as far as resolution is concerned, but by working within those limits, they can keep the impact high by making enemies feel incredibly close to you just by the amount of detail you can see in their faces. While I can see this won't be for everyone, I did enjoy it and will likely keep it installed to do the occasional run when I'm craving a quick hit of horror. It is dragged down by how hard it is to learn, but once you have a basic grip, you can have fun uncovering the stories, and that is the real star here. 7 out of 10. After I'd completed World of Horror, I did a bit of backlog organization and realized I had over 10 games technically in progress, so I took a look at some of the shortest ones I could check off, and Bonelab floated to the top of that list. I remember when this was announced, people were creaming their shorts saying this was going to change VR forever, and playing it now, I mean, it's a good game, don't get me wrong, but I think some people got a little bit too excited. The actual game here is a very bizarre story where you travel through an abandoned game asset to escape a lab. There are multi-hour-long videos discussing the lore of this and Boneworks, the first game, so I'm not going to pretend I know what's going on and just tell you what it was like to play. Over the course of the game, you'll unlock the ability to change what body type you're using, like a fast, fragile sprinter to move quickly, or a slow-moving heavy to throw people around. It's cool and a great demonstration of what can be done in VR, but in the end it was a little bit more than a gimmick. Once I was out of the levels where I had to play as a specific form, I stuck to Sprinter for more or less the entire time, unless I specifically had to push a giant ball or fit into a vent. The gameplay outside of this gimmick is very well done. The gunplay all feels fantastic and has some of the most satisfying reloading in a non-gun simulator. The melee combat is alright too, but melee combat always sucks in VR due to the total lack of any feedback. The fully simulated body is also cool, but occasionally frustrating when your arm gets stuck in a certain place because you didn't move it correctly around something. I get that it's accurate, but occasionally that accuracy can get in the way of fun. Also, if you're not extremely comfortable in VR, this will almost certainly give you some level of motion sickness. Now, I consider myself to be fairly comfortable with most things in VR after playing Elite Dangerous, driving games, and using free movement in basically everything, and I never really had many issues, but this game had a couple of sections which made me feel quite a bit green, so if you're pretty sensitive to that kind of stuff, you might want to consider giving it a miss. I also played the entire thing on native Quest 3, and it looks pretty great. You can tell it's slimmed down from the PC versions with some longer loading screens and the odd bit of chug here and there, but I still think it looks impressively good for what I'm playing it on. Now, the main draw of this game was meant to be the mods, and I personally haven't touched them at all. I wanted to experience the game as is, so I didn't really bother to give them a try, since it wouldn't be fair to review the game based on what someone else made. That said, what's here is a great showcase of what VR can do, but the lore is extremely confusing, making any sort of story extremely hard to follow. If you have a strong stomach and want to get as in touch with VR as possible, this is the game for you. Another 7 out of 10. I stayed on with VR as I had another game I'd started and could finish relatively quickly, Moss Book 1. This is a game where you play as the reader of a storybook controlling and aiding a mouse called Quill on her adventure to save her grandpa. The entire idea of this game is really great since it makes perfect sense to bring a storybook to life and have you observe this world from the outside. The way you look into each level like you're literally shoving your head into the pages really makes you feel like you've done just that, and is one of the most comfortable and also most immersive ways to view a VR world that I've played. The interactions you can physically make with the world by moving things around and allowing Quill to progress work really well, and aside from a little bit of floatiness with certain jumps, the game is a lot of fun to play. However, it is let down slightly by the fact that periodically you'll be pulled out of the world and back to reading the book in some weird exitless library, and the narrator will tell you what's happening whilst you just stare at a picture book. I get that this decision was probably made to save some cash and transition between acts of the game, but it quite literally pulls you out so hard and is extremely dull since you just sat listening to someone read a book whilst you stare at a stationary picture with nothing to do. I'd have much preferred to just keep the cutscenes in-game, which there are several of, and use the book as a chapter select instead. Aside from this one minor gripe though, the gameplay is totally fine, if a little bit simple, but anything too complex and you'd probably run out of buttons on the controllers. The story is what you'd expect, a super simple fantasy adventure which plays out like a storybook, because it is one. It's a little childish sometimes, sure, but the presentation and gimmick really save the day and help immerse you in what's going on a whole lot more. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it gets the job done to justify the gameplay. Speaking of presentation, this all looks great in Quest 3 and I ran into no real slowdowns or bugs, so no complaints here. All in all, while I wouldn't play this again, I did very much enjoy it when I was actually playing the game. It's worth sitting through the dull picture book narration to get to the actual playing, so I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. Back to some flat screen, and Cult of the Lamb is another I'd started like a year ago and then completely forgotten all about. I started a new save recently and it became my go-to whenever I had a quick 30 minutes. The gameplay loop of heading out on crusades to gain new materials and hunt down old gods, and then coming back to build up and manage your little cool base is great fun, and though I probably enjoyed cult upgrading and management just a little bit more, that's just me. The combat here all feels very fast-paced and relatively responsive, with my only complaint being due to the art style not really allowing for much vertical play, which did occasionally result in some wonky hitbox feelings for both me and enemies. But you know, probably just a skill issue. The cult building and management is fairly straightforward, with you having to keep things clean, keep everyone fed, and make sure they don't lose faith and leave. It really allows you to be a little more creative and focus on the fun stuff to build, rather than worrying about resource income too badly. There were a handful of times I was low on resources I needed, but either going out on a crusade or sending my followers out on missions sorted this within minutes, so it was never much of a problem. The story here is fairly straightforward, but it serves as good motivation for whatever you're doing. You're meant to be sacrificed to these old gods, but instead are saved by an ancient being who orders you to create a cult and take down the false idols. I won't say any more beyond that, but just know that you generally play this for the gameplay, not the story. So while it's serviceable, it's also very predictable. If I had to explain the whole thing, I could probably do so in like 3 sentences. Visually, the game looks fantastic. The 2D, 3D art style may sometimes cause some issues in combat, but it always looks fantastic, and the range of enemies and followers is extremely vast, so you're never short of new, pretty things to look at. Your base area may be small, but you still have plenty of room to decorate it just how you like, and every building has a great style, making building it up over time extremely satisfying. The style also lends itself really well to comedic moments, like most of the rituals. Seeing your followers' faces as they're sacrificed to demons or dancing around your statue naked never failed to get a laugh out of me. Now, my one complaint with this game relates to what I said at the start. It was my quick 30-minute game. I personally found that grinding it for hours at a time to be quite repetitive, and the shorter bursts were a lot better. It was the combat more than the base building, since it was essentially a roguelike every time, and between the survivor genre and VR, I've had enough roguelites for a lifetime. That said, I still very much enjoyed this game, and while I know there's a ton of post-game content, I'll probably be leaving it behind to move on to something new. A ton of fun and a strong 8.5 out of 10. Celeste has only been in the works for about 3 months, which for me is basically a single sitting in relation to how long other games tend to stretch out. Celeste is a game that I normally wouldn't enjoy since it's a difficult platformer where you're meant to die hundreds of times per level before you work out what to do. But I made an exception since I'd heard the story here was really touching, and while it wasn't as in-depth as I'd expected, I'd say it lived up to that reputation pretty well. Gameplay first. As I said, it's a difficult platformer and you're making your way up a mountain, with each area having its own style and set of mechanics. While it's not quite 100% perfect precision required, the margin for error on some obstacles is pretty low and makes it occasionally frustrating, especially when you die so close to a checkpoint. One thing I love is that it shows you collectibles and then immediately follows it up by saying, these serve no purpose other than an extra challenge if you want, so feel free to leave them, and by God, did I ever follow those instructions. While I did tear a few hairs out, mainly on the final level, it was mostly a skill issue rather than anything the game was doing, and once you finally complete a section, it does feel pretty satisfying to accomplish. And that ties pretty well into the story. You're playing as Madeline and she's climbing the mountain to prove to herself that she can do it. which does sound like a very basic justification, but it will make sense once I explain a little bit deeper. As the climb progresses, she'll have the occasional panic attack, as well as arguing with a seemingly evil clone of her who continually puts her down. While it seems like the mountain is making the voice into her head into a real person, the obvious connections to depression, anxiety, and general mental health are there, and as someone who has dealt with that sort of thing, this does a great job of showing what it can feel like. As I was struggling with some of the final levels and getting mad and basically calling myself a moron, I couldn't help but laugh at these similarities between me and Madeline and how I really did need to get that voice to calm down so that we could work together and get to the top. There's also quite a lot of subtext about Madeline being trans and the mountain being not only about her regaining control of her depression and anxieties, also accepting her and her trans identity. I've had a search around, the creator has apparently confirmed this herself. Also, certain gamers seem upset by this for whatever reason, and if you're one of these people, I'd just like to tell you, go fuck yourself. On this channel, we support our LGBTQ+ homies. Anyway, all in all, I did really enjoy the game, and while I will almost certainly never touch it again if I don't have to for video reasons, I'm glad I played it. It's a great reminder to always be kind to yourself when you fail, because it doesn't always mean it's over. 8 out of 10. And that was June. I can't not mention that last month was another insane month of growth for this channel. The reception to last month's review video absolutely blew me away, so thank you so much to everyone that watched that. It really means the world to me that people actually want to listen to my awful opinions about video games. Like I say at the end of every video, it feels like I still have a bunch of ideas for this channel, so bear with me as I work through those, and I hope you enjoy these review videos as I do. I've got one of two ideas that I want to do for the next essay, and I get the feeling that they might be kind of in-depth and maybe take a little bit longer than usual. So if there isn't going to be a second video on this channel for this month, I'll be sure to let you know on the community page, so keep an eye out for that. But just know that I'm working as hard as I can because I really do love making these videos, and the fact that there are some people that also enjoy watching them, it really is amazing. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know in the comments what you think of any of these games if you've played them yourselves, or if not, tell me what you've been playing this month. My backlog can only get bigger, as we all know. Subscribe if you want to see more, like the video if you did, love yourself no matter what, and I'll see you in the next one.